My stepsister accused me of sleeping with her husband. My family banished me without proof. But 7 months later, I got an email that broke them and exposed the truth they never wanted to hear. I'm 28 years old. I work in digital marketing, and I need to tell this story because what happened like a year and a half ago literally destroyed my family and left me with nothing overnight. I guess I should start from the beginning. Or when my dad remarried after my mom died, I was about 12 at the time, and he met this woman who had a daughter, Emily, who was 2 years older than me. At first, everything seemed fine. I was happy that my dad had found someone after being alone for so long, and Emily and I got along relatively well, or so I thought back then. Looking back, I should have seen it coming because there was always something weird about the way she acted when things didn't go her way. We grew up together in the same house, shared family birthdays, graduations, all those things families are supposed to do, but I always felt like there was this invisible competition between us. You know what I mean? If I got good grades, she had to get better ones. If I got a job, she got one that paid more. It was exhausting, honestly, but I tried not to pay attention to it because I thought that eventually we'd mature and all that would go away. Emily married Michael when she was 24. I was 22 at the time, and I remember at the wedding everyone was commenting on what a perfect couple they made. He was a lawyer, came from a good family, all very pretty on the outside. I was honestly happy for her because I thought that maybe marriage would calm her down a bit, that she'd stop being so competitive with me now that she had her own life and her own husband. Michael was always nice to me, normal, the way any brother-in-law would be. We'd talk at family gatherings. Sometimes we'd exchange messages about gifts for Emily, or stuff like that. But never anything weird or anything that could be misinterpreted. It was literally just a cordial in-law relationship. Emily and Michael lived 20 minutes from my parents' house. I lived in a small but decent apartment near my work. I'd visit my parents twice a month, sometimes more, if there was a celebration or something. And my life was pretty normal. I had my job, my friends. I was dating someone at the time, though, nothing serious. Basically, it was a regular adult life without much drama. Everything changed on a Sunday in March. Or maybe it was April. I don't remember exactly, but it was spring because it had that weird weather where you don't know if you should wear a jacket or not. I had gone to lunch at my parents' house, something I did often on Sundays. And when I got there, I noticed Emily's car was there, which was weird because she almost never went without warning. She was always very much about planning everything in advance. I walked in through the front door and found Emily sitting in the living room with my parents. And all three of them looked at me in a way I'll never forget. It was a mix of disappointment, disgust, and fury. And I just stood there like an idiot with my keys in my hand thinking, what the hell is going on here? My dad was the first to speak, and he told me in a voice I'd never heard from him, cold and full of hatred, to sit down because we needed to talk about something very serious. I sat down, obviously confused and scared because the energy in that room was horrible, and then Emily started crying, dramatic sobs with her hands on her face, and through tears she said she couldn't believe I had done this to her, that she had considered me her sister all this time and I had betrayed her trust in the worst possible way. I literally had no idea what she was talking about. I asked her what had happened, what I was supposed to have done, and she looked at me with those red eyes from crying and said, "You slept with my husband. You've been having an affair with Michael." I froze, completely in shock, because that was so absurd, so out of reality that I couldn't even process it. I started laughing, which in retrospect was the worst thing I could have done, but it was nervous laughter because the situation was so ridiculous that my brain didn't know how to react. I told them that was completely crazy, that I would never do something like that Michael and I barely talked beyond greetings at family gatherings. But Emily kept insisting, said she had proof, that Michael had confessed everything, that we'd been seeing each other secretly for months. I kept denying it, obviously. Started begging them to believe me, to explain that I'd never been alone with Michael, that all of this was a horrible misunderstanding. But my dad interrupted me and said that Emily had already shown them messages and photos that proved everything. I asked to see that supposed proof. If it exists, show it to me because I know this isn't real. But my dad refused, said he wasn't going to allow me to keep lying and manipulating, and that he'd already made his decision. My mom, well, my stepmom, but the only mother I really efficated, remembered, was crying too and saying she was disappointed in me, That how could I do this to Emily after everything we'd shared? I tried to talk to her, explain to her that none of this was true, but she just shook her head like she couldn't even look at me. The situation escalated super fast. I was screaming that this was a lie. Emily kept crying and saying I was manipulative, and my dad finally stood up and told me I had 1 hour to get my stuff out of his house. All the things I still kept there in my old room, and that after that he didn't want to see me again. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Like, this was my father. The man who had raised me, who had taught me to ride a bike, who had been at all my graduations, and now he was kicking me out of his life without even giving me the chance to properly defend myself. I begged him, literally begged him on my knees to listen to me, to investigate, to talk to Michael, but he just kept repeating for me to leave now. My stepmom just cried, and Emily had this expression on her face that when I remember it now, I realize it was almost satisfaction. Like she was enjoying seeing me destroyed. But in that moment, I was so in shock that I didn't process that. I left that house crying so hard I could barely see to drive. I called my best friend Rachel on the way and could only say that I needed help, that something horrible had happened. Rachel told me to come straight to her apartment. She was living with her boyfriend at the time in a small but cozy place, and when I got there and told them the whole story, they were just as shocked as I was. Rachel hugged me while I cried and kept repeating that I didn't understand what was happening, that this was all a nightmare. And her boyfriend was already Googling if there could be some kind of misunderstanding or mistaken identity or something that would explain this craziness. I stayed on their couch that night, didn't sleep at all, just stared at the ceiling trying to understand how my life had fallen apart in a matter of 2 hours. The next few days were horrible. Rachel had to call my work to say I was sick because I couldn't even talk without starting to cry. I tried calling my dad like 1,000 times, sent him long messages explaining that everything was false, that please investigate before making permanent decisions. But he blocked me. My stepmom blocked me too. And when I tried contacting other family members, I discovered that Emily had already told them all her version. My aunts and uncles, my cousins, people I'd known my whole life, they all turned their backs on me without even asking for my side of the story. The only person from the family who contacted me was my grandmother, my dad's mom, and when I explained everything to her, she told me she believed me, but that my dad was so furious that he wasn't going to listen to anyone at that moment. About a week passed and I decided I needed to talk to Michael. Like, he could clear all this up. He could confirm that nothing had ever happened between us. I got his work number. It was public knowledge because he was a lawyer, and his information was in his firm's directory. And I called him. When he answered and heard my voice, he immediately got nervous. I could hear it in his tone, and I asked him straight out what the hell had happened, why Emily was saying these things. Michael was quiet for a moment, and then said he was really sorry, that Emily had pressured him to confirm the story, that she had told him that if he didn't, she would reveal something about him that would ruin his career. I asked him what could be so serious, but he just said he couldn't talk anymore, that please don't contact him again, and hung up. That call left me even more confused because obviously there was something else going on, something I didn't know about, but I had no way to find out what it was. Rachel and her boyfriend let me stay with them as long as I needed, but I knew I couldn't abuse their hospitality forever. I needed to find my own place and rebuild my life somehow. I looked for cheap apartments, found a tiny studio, like really small, about 320 square feet, if that, in a not very nice area of the city, but it was the only thing I could afford on my salary, since now I had to put together a whole new life from scratch. I moved in there after like 3 weeks at Rachel's, and I remember the first night in that place I sat on the floor, because I still didn't have furniture, and cried until I fell asleep. The following months were probably the hardest of my life. I'd go to work, do my job mechanically, and come back to my studio to watch Netflix until I fell asleep. I didn't feel like socializing, going out, doing anything really. I felt like they had ripped out a part of me and I didn't know how to function without it. Rachel came to visit me often, brought food because she knew I wasn't eating well, and forced me to go walk in the park near my apartment at least once a week. Those walks were the only thing that helped a little. There was something about being outside, seeing trees and sky and people living their normal lives, that reminded me that the world kept turning even though mine had stopped. Like 4 months after all this, in a moment of desperation and probably a bad idea, I decided to try going to my parents' house. I needed to see them face to face, make them understand that Emily was lying, that they couldn't just erase me from their lives without giving me a real chance to explain myself. I drove there on a Saturday afternoon. My heart was beating so hard I felt like I was going to throw up. I knocked on the door and my dad opened. When he saw me, his expression hardened immediately. He told me to leave, that he'd already made it clear he didn't want to see me, but I begged him to give me just 5 minutes. 5 minutes to really listen to me. He started closing the door, but I put my foot to stop it and started talking. Fast. Telling him to please investigate. To talk to Michael without Emily present. To look at that supposed proof more carefully because something didn't add up. My stepmom appeared behind my dad and told me to stop harassing her family, that they had already moved on, and I should do the same. And my dad finally pushed my foot out of the way and closed the door in my face. I stood there for I don't know how long, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10, crying on the porch of the house where I'd grown up, where I'd celebrated Christmases and birthdays and all the important moments of my childhood and adolescence. And I realized I had really lost my family. I went back to my car. I don't remember driving back. I just remember that suddenly I was parked in front of my building with no memory of how I'd gotten there. After that, I fell into a pretty serious depression. Honestly, I started missing work. Wasn't answering calls or messages. Rachel had to literally come get me out of bed at one point because she was worried I'd do something stupid. It's not that I was thinking about hurting myself exactly, but I also didn't really care much if something happened to me. You know what I mean? It was like I was living on autopilot without really being present. Rachel convinced me to go to therapy. Found a psychologist who worked with sliding scale prices because I couldn't afford much. And I started going once a week. The therapist helped me process the trauma of losing my family so abruptly, to understand that what had happened wasn't my fault, that I couldn't control Emily's actions or my parents' decisions. Months went by like that, me in my routine of work therapy apartment, trying to build some kind of new life. When one day, I think it was October, like 7 months after everything exploded, I received an email from Michael. The subject said, "I need to talk to you," and I almost deleted it thinking it was spam or that it would bring me more problems. But something made me open. The email was long. It started with a huge apology for everything that had happened, and then explained that he and Emily were getting divorced because he had discovered that she had been having an affair, not with me obviously, but with a coworker of his, and that when he confronted her, she panicked and decided to make up the whole story about me to deflect attention. I couldn't believe what I was reading. My brain wasn't processing the information correctly. Michael explained that Emily had given him an ultimatum when he discovered the affair. Either he confirmed the false story about me or she would tell everyone that he had gambling problems, something that apparently was true and that could ruin his reputation as a lawyer if it became public. Michael had agreed at the time because he was panicking and wasn't thinking clearly. But now that he was getting divorced anyway and she was using everything against him in the divorce proceedings, he decided he had to clear his conscience and tell the truth. He attached to the email evidence of everything. Messages between Emily and her lover. Messages where Emily literally planned how she was going to blame me. Even an audio where she told someone on the phone that she knew it was all a lie, but that it was the only way to save herself. I sat in front of my laptop for hours, just staring at that email, reading it over and over to make sure it was real, that I wasn't imagining it. Part of me felt enormous validation, like, finally there was proof that I had been telling the truth all this time. But another part just felt deep rage that Emily had deliberately ruined my life, that she had destroyed my relationship with my family just to save her own ass. I forwarded everything to Rachel immediately, and she called crying, telling me she always knew I was telling the truth, and that now we could finally prove it. It took me like 2 days to decide what to do with that information. Part of me wanted to just keep it to myself and move on with my life without ever having contact with my family again. But another part, the part that was still hurt and angry, needed them to know the truth, needed them to see what their perfect daughter had done. I printed all the documents, put them in a folder, and went to my parents' house on a Sunday morning. This time I didn't knock on the door. I just left the folder on the porch with a note that said, "Here's the truth you didn't want to hear from me. The proof that Emily lied about everything." I rang the doorbell and left before anyone opened. I don't know how long it took them to open the folder or read everything. But 3 days later I got a call from my dad. When I saw his name on my phone screen, my heart almost jumped out of my chest. I answered, and there was a long silence before he started talking. His voice sounded broken, like I'd never heard him like that. And he started apologizing, said he'd been an idiot. that he should have listened to me, that he should have investigated before making such drastic decisions. He started crying. My dad, who almost never showed emotions like that, crying on the phone saying he was so sorry, that he loved me, that he'd made the worst mistake of his life by not believing me. I was crying too, but there was so much rage mixed with the relief that I didn't know what to feel. I told him his apology didn't erase 7 months of treating me like I didn't exist. 7 months where I had to rebuild my life completely alone. My stepmom got on the phone too, asking for forgiveness between sobs, saying she'd been blind, that Emily had manipulated her, that she should never have doubted me. I told them I needed time, that I couldn't just come back and pretend nothing had happened, that they'd hurt me too much and I needed to process everything. My dad asked if we could meet to talk in person, and I agreed, but set conditions, said we'd meet in a neutral place, a public cafe, not at their house, and that Emily couldn't be present. We agreed to meet the following week at a coffee shop near the park where I used to walk. The meeting was awkward and painful. My parents looked terrible, like they'd aged 10 years in those months. And we spent like 2 hours talking about everything that had happened. They told me that after reading the evidence they had confronted Emily, and she initially tried to deny everything but eventually admitted she'd made up the story about me. My parents said they'd asked her to leave their house, that they didn't want to see her again, and I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness about that. Because as much as Emily had destroyed me, part of me remembered when we were kids and got along well. I told my parents I appreciated their apologies, but that our relationship was going to have to be rebuilt from scratch, that I couldn't just go back to being their daughter like nothing happened. In the following weeks, my parents tried to get closer. They'd call me, often, send me messages asking how I was, inviting me to dinner, but I was still too angry and too hurt to accept everything immediately. My therapist helped me establish healthy boundaries, to understand that it was valid that I needed time and space, that forgiving didn't mean forgetting or pretending the damage hadn't occurred. The news of what Emily had done started spreading among family and friends. The people who had turned their backs on me started contacting me asking for apologies, saying they'd been unfair, but honestly, I no longer had the energy or interest in rebuilding all those relationships. I'd learned who was really there for me and who was only family by convenience. Emily, from what I learned later, was completely isolated. Her friends abandoned her when they found out the truth. Michael went ahead with the divorce and apparently got a restraining order at some point because she kept harassing him, and my parents finally told her she couldn't come back to their house after she showed up crying, asking for forgiveness, but still refusing to take real responsibility for what she'd done. There was a part of me that felt sorry for her when I found out all that, but honestly, it was very small compared to the rage I still felt for everything her lies had cost me. Today, almost 2 years after everything started, my relationship with my parents is better, but it's definitely not what it was before. I see them like once a month. We talk on the phone every week, but there's a distance there that I don't know if it'll ever completely disappear. They understand that it was really hard for me to forgive them, that their decision to believe Emily without questioning it fundamentally changed how I see them. I still live in that same small studio. I've been saving to move to something better, but honestly, I'm in no hurry. I got used to this space and it has like an overcoming energy that I like. My job is fine. My friends are amazing. Rachel is still the favorite person in the world. And basically, I'm rebuilding my life my way and on my terms. I haven't had contact with Emily again. I heard she moved to another city after everything exploded, and honestly, I hope to never see her again. I don't wish her harm exactly, but I'm also not interested in knowing anything about her life. Michael sent me another email a few months ago, thanking me for not having taken legal action against him for his participation in everything, and apologizing again. I responded that I understood he had also been a victim of Emily's manipulation, but that I preferred not to keep in touch. My therapist says I've made a lot of progress in terms of processing the trauma and betrayal, and I guess she's right. Because there are days where I can think about everything that happened without feeling like my chest is breaking. Last week, I was walking through the park, that same one where I used to walk with Rachel when everything was horrible, and I realized I was happy, like genuinely happy, not just okay or surviving, but really content with my life. It's not the life I had planned. It's definitely not the family I thought I'd have, but it's mine, and I built it myself from the ashes of everything I lost. And that, I guess, is enough for now.